All right. Oh. Okay, we're at the Little Bighorn battlefield, also known as Custer's Last Stand.
The Battle of the Little Bighorn, known to the Lakota and other Plains Indians as the Battle of the Greasy Grass, and also commonly referred to as Custer's Last Stand, was an armed engagement between combined forces of the Lakota, Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes and the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the United States. The battle resulted in the defeat of the U.S. forces and was the most significant action of the Great Sioux War of 1876.
By one of the largest Indian villages the Northern Plains had ever seen. A Sundance pretty much was going down not too far from here at Rosebud Creek. A lot of tension was going down. The Crow, whose tribe's reservation we are on right now, did not like the Northern Cheyenne and the Lakota and the Arapaho rolling up in their territory. So things all came to a climax right here when Custer pretty much just didn't listen to what his scouts were telling him. They warned him of a large force gathering. He didn't believe it because of his prior experience. Native Americans would never conjugate into that big of an alliance. They also infought with themselves as well. Okay, so behind us is the mass grave that was dug after the battle. And here are the headstones trying to represent where Custer's men would have fallen during the battle. Custer's buried in New York at West Point. Okay, so right behind me, from what we're gathering, an unknown Indian warrior was advancing, and he got taken out, blown right in the face. And as soon as he got taken out, the firing stopped and all the Indians rushed, and the last stand took place. Okay, so we just found out that it was a hot, sweaty day, no wind, just like today, no storm after the battle, just a lot of dust. My voice is echoing off this wall. This is gnarly. Man, Custer promised he would not kill any more Cheyenne, and he just did not seem to care about it. So what's pretty gnarly is there was some crazy mutilation going down in the plains during these Indian wars, and man, some of these soldiers knew what was coming when they were about to get defeated, so they would literally save the last bullet for themselves. And you know what's pretty messed up too? It was often like the women and the children who would come along after the battle and mutilate these dead bodies. That's so gnarly. Happened right here. But peace through unity. Let's go.
After you talk about mutilating.
Whenever I come to these historical places where some like super dark, human, violent, extreme parts of the human experience go down, I always get super tripped out because I try to put myself in the shoes of the people that were here, both of the soldiers and of the native warriors that were fighting. It must have been a day like they would have never experienced in their whole lives. Our it would have been their last day on Earth, and I can't even comprehend that. Yeah, behind me is Reno's retreat, where some of the survivors actually, of the soldiers on the soldier side, did make it out of Reno's retreat. So that's something I thought was pretty interesting, because you always hear that no U.S. soldiers survived, but some did. They just weren't at the battle about 5 miles to the north of us. So anyways, yeah, I just love coming to these places and just kind of trying to put myself in the shoes of those people and how extreme, just insanely extreme that would have been. Like, I ask myself, and you should ask yourself too, what would you do? What would you do if you were fighting with your brother in arms? You're living the soldier's life. Most likely you're an immigrant. 60% of Custer's men were actually immigrants from Europe. You're out here in Montana, no man's land, Indian country. Man. So that's it. The Battle of Little Bighorn.
Out of the west, Bozeman, Montana, Colonel John Gibbon comes marching with 500 infantrymen. And out of the east, Bismarck, North Dakota, Fort Abraham Lincoln, General Alfred H. Terry comes with 1,000 soldiers, including all 12 companies of the U.S. 7th Cavalry under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Morning of June 25th, 1876, at a high point in the Wolf Mountains, that mountain range there about 15 miles from here, Custer's Crow and Arikara Indian scouts. Yes, Arikara Indians, another tribe, longtime enemies of the Sioux, basically decided to help the soldiers under the premise of any enemy of my enemy is my friend. They spot what they tell Custer is a huge village on the Little Bighorn, but they give him conflicting information. Some say, more Indians than you can kill in a day, but a few others say, you got to attack now, the Indians are going to scatter and run. Now Custer was obsessed with the idea the Indians would scatter and run, because he knew from his time out west that in time of war, it was very difficult to find an Indian village. Anytime soldiers were known to be near, villages would generally pick up and scatter, because the safest, most practical, efficient way, keep the women, children, and other non-combatants safe, get them out of harm's way. Custer rode out with 566 enlisted men, 31 officers, fighting force, 597 men. He has 40 scouts with him, Crow and Arikara, generally a few others. Also, he has 10 civilians with him, guides, interpreters, mule packers. Now, neither the scouts nor the civilians were hired to fight, nor were they expected to fight, although some did. So Custer moves out, but he begins splitting his command immediately. All the food for the men, forage for the horses, extra ammunition, being carried by 175 slow-moving mules. Mules can't keep up with a faster-moving cavalry horse. No army in history has ever gone anywhere without supplies. Has to be protected at all costs. Custer leaves 125 soldiers riding with the pack train. Custer then sends 3 companies, 115 men under the command of Captain Fred Benteen, on a scouting mission to the south. Make sure the Indians aren't fleeing south along the Little Bighorn. Custer gets closer to the river. He splits up again. He sends Major Marcus Reno with 3 companies, 140 soldiers in those 3 companies, tells them to cross the river, attack whatever he sees. Now, you often hear that Custer stupidly and foolishly rode into a trap here at Little Bighorn, but that's not what the Native American accounts say. Yes, they knew soldiers were in the area, but they thought they were too strong to be attacked. They didn't think anybody would attack them. So when Major Reno crosses the river about 5 miles from where you're sitting or standing, down in the valley down below, it causes chaos, panic, confusion in the village. non-combatants screaming, "We're gonna die!" The women screaming to their children, "Run, run, the soldiers are coming after you!" Women, children, non-combatants, hundreds of them, begin fleeing along the river here. Again, down below you here at the foot of the hills, hiding in all those trees down there. But the warriors, nevertheless, they very quickly respond to the attack. Mrs. Spotted Horn Bull, an Papa Lakota woman, would say, "I stood and watched the warriors of my people. They rode like the wind through the village to attack the soldiers." Now, Reno was a good Civil War soldier. He had been cited for gallantry on a couple of occasions, but he had never fought Indians. He has to cross about 2.5 miles of open plain to get to the south end of the village. He would later say, "I get closer and closer to the village. The ground seems to be growing Indians." He said, "I thought it was suicide to continue." He stops about 300 yards shy of the village, forms a skirmish line, a thin skirmish line on the valley floor, holds it for about 10 minutes. He's being outflanked. He withdraws into the woods down there a couple miles from here in the valley. Holds that for about 10 or 20 minutes, but he's surrounded. He's outnumbered. He doesn't know what to do. He turns to Bloody Knife, Custer's favorite scout, and the Rickera. "Hey, what do? How do we get out of this mess?" All of a sudden, pow! Right in the head, Bloody Knife is shot. Reno's face is splattered with blood and gore. According to some of the surviving soldiers, Reno seems to lose it at this point. He begins screaming out what some of these soldiers called contradictory, panicky orders. "Mount! Dismount! Mount! Those of you who want to make their escape and live, follow me!" He jumps up on his horse. He rides pell-mell out of the timber, across the open plain toward the river. If any formal retreat order is given or blown by the buglers, many men don't hear it. At least 16 are left behind in the timber. Some of the surviving soldiers would later recall, "One minute I'm shooting at the oncoming warriors. The next minute I look around, everybody else is running. I got up on my horse, I got out of there too." No rear guard is sent out to help protect the withdrawing soldiers. Reno would later say, "I led a charge to get my men to safety." That's not what the Native Americans called it. They said it was like chasing a terrified, panicked, stampeding herd of buffalo. Warriors killed soldiers as they fled across the plain, killed more as they crossed the river, killed even more as they're scrambling up steep bluffs to try to get away. American Horse, one of the warriors would later say, with great satisfaction, "It was a grand chase." The warriors, Reno gets to the top of the bluffs, 4 miles from where we are here. You see those Twin Peaks 3 miles out yonder? About a mile past that. Reno gets to the top of the bluffs. Benteen is riding by. Benteen has received urgent orders to join Custer immediately. Custer's last message reads, "Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs, P.S., bring packs." But Reno, when he sees Benteen, comes out and says, "My God, Benteen, you gotta stop and help me. I've lost half my men." Benteen does stop and help. For the next hour and change, the soldiers do nothing, even though they hear heavy gunfire coming from this general vicinity. Custer has 5 companies under his immediate command, 210 men, including himself. Now you got to keep 3 things in mind. First, nobody knows what Custer's battle plan is at this stage because he doesn't tell anybody. He doesn't tell Reno anything. He's not told Benteen anything. Also, second, Custer most likely does not know Reno so badly whipped that he's no longer a threat. That, of course, leaves all 1,500 or more warriors free to come up and attack Custer and his 210. Finally, Custer does not know, probably doesn't realize till very near the end of his life, Benteen's not coming. He's always expecting Benteen and 115 more soldiers to join him and reinforce him up here. So, Custer in 5 companies, 210 men under his immediate command, 210 including Custer. They ride down the drainage we call Medicine Tail Coulee. It comes out near the north end of the village. They don't cross the river. They met with some resistance. There's some fighting, some casualties, not very many. Custer then withdraws, reunites all 5 companies up on a place called Calhoun Hill. Now, if you follow the ridge here, all the way out, at the end of the ridge, if your sight line there, you see a big bush there. To the left of that bush, about 250 yards out of your sight, is Calhoun Hill. Here is where I believe Custer makes the fatal mistake of splitting his command once too often. He leaves 3 companies on Calhoun Hill, 120 soldiers in those 3 companies to act as a rear guard and as a beacon for Benteen. Custer then takes the remaining 2 companies, 80 men or 90, if you count the 10-man command staff, rides behind this ridge, sweeps down, goes down to the river. Why? Remember, women, children, non-combatants are hiding down there. They had fled there earlier, right? Most historians believe if Custer did indeed go to the river, his idea at that point is to try to round up women and children to use as hostages, human shields. That would leave the soldiers free because the warriors aren't going to attack soldiers holding their non-combatants. They're not going to put them in harm's way. Leave the soldiers free. Burn and destroy the village to kill thousands of ponies. Custer probably thinks he can end the fighting, the killing, the bloodshed, the war right here and now. Custer is either repulsed or moves back up this general vicinity to wait for Benteen. He takes up a position behind you in the National Cemetery. That, folks, is a national cemetery. It's like Arlington. Has almost nothing to do with the Custer dead. Has 1 company fighting there, another company down along this trail in the so-called basin area. Now, everything I'm telling you, this is going to take time to develop. Maybe an hour, maybe as long as an hour and a half. Because first of all, it takes the warriors some time to disengage from fighting Reno, come back a couple of miles. Some stop and get fresh ponies, but a lot come up on foot because they start using guerrilla tactics up here. Draws, coulees, the ravines, tall grass and natural vegetation to move in against the soldiers. And warriors eventually begin spewing out of the deep ravine like lava from Mount Vesuvius. Who comes riding up out of the deep ravine but Crazy Horse? He begins riding back and forth in front of companies of soldiers, taunting them, daring them to shoot him. Every soldier that sees him opens up. Pow, 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 pow! No white man bullet ever hurt Crazy Horse. You can imagine how fired up the warriors have to be seeing this. I mean, they just sent Reno running for his life, killing 40 of his soldiers. They have the soldiers up here outnumbered. Now you have a single brave. Looks like from their standpoint, like he's taken on the whole U.S. Army. Nobody can bring him down. It has to fire him up. Lame white man, the Southern Cheyenne chief, he rides up. He takes up the situation, sizes it up in a glance. To him, the answer's obvious. Several hundred warriors, 40 soldiers. Come! It's a good day to die! We can kill them all! He screams, and he leads probably the only Hollywood-style grand Indian attack of the whole Custer portion of the battle. Several hundred warriors ride up. They sweep up over those soldiers on the ridge. Half of the soldiers are killed. The other half go fleeing for their lives up toward Calhoun Hill. Some on horseback, some on foot. Now everything's starting to fall apart. The company here on the ridge has fallen. Now Company L, up there on the skirmish line, they've done a good job holding warriors at bay. But when soldiers begin fleeing for their lives toward them, they actually have to change position, give covering fire to try to save their comrades. In doing so, that opens up pathways, and hundreds of warriors under Gall, Two Moons, Crow King, He Dog, Low Dog, Rain in the Face, and others, they sweep up like a tidal wave over Calhoun Hill. Two Moons would later say, we circled around the soldiers, swirling around them like water around a stone. All of a sudden, Custer's right wing is starting to fall like dominoes. Now it becomes every man for himself. People fighting individualistically, trying to save their lives. Some of them are fighting, others are fleeing, some on horseback, some on foot. Out of the whole 120-man right wing, only about a dozen soldiers make it alive to join Custer up on the hill. Within minutes, Custer has lost 3/5 of his command. He has fewer than 100 soldiers left. He's completely surrounded. He's badly outnumbered. Native accounts indicate he tried to remain proactive. Half the soldiers are seen charging down again to the National Cemetery, drive the warriors back again. They dismount, they form a skirmish line. Their horses are given some modicum of protection in this little drainage here to your right. Anywhere from 1 to 5 horsemen leave the hillside. Either they're trying to escape or join the soldiers here, or it's certainly possible Custer's trying to get one last message out to Reno Benteen or somewhere to get help. Stands in Timber says this is where the Suicide Boys move in. Stands in Timber describes the Suicide Boys as a group of 20 younger Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, probably kids in their teens. They agreed amongst themselves to die fighting to protect the village if necessary. The Suicide Boys here lead a charge, either stampeding the horses or attacking the soldiers on the skirmish line. Of course, the Suicide Boys are followed by hundreds of other warriors. The soldiers on the skirmish line here, they begin withdrawing, fighting back, but then eventually begin fleeing and running for their lives down into the deep ravine. Actually, the last 28 soldiers left alive in Custer's command probably died fighting in or fleeing through the deep ravine. But nobody drives 1,000 miles to see the deep ravine. You all come out here because of what happened on this lonely, windswept hillside, out in the middle of nowhere. Custer and the remnants of his shattered command, probably 40 soldiers or so left alive. In other words, about as many people as we have sitting on the green benches right in front of me here. Not the side group, just the people here. We all shoot and kill our horses up there, make that last stand of legend in history. We've all shot our horses because you got to make breastworks. There's no place to take cover up there, nothing to stop a bullet. Custer knows that despite what you see in movies, warriors traditionally didn't make suicide charges against a fortified position, and they don't here either. They go back to the opportunistic fighting. They're crawling through the tall grass on their hands and knees, popping their head up, firing a shot, ducking back down, their faces in the dirt, bullets whizzing harmlessly overhead. Soldiers apparently starting to run low on ammunition because the warriors said they threw away their big guns, starting fighting with their little guns. Warriors start unleashing hundreds of arrows. Silent death falling from the sky. Till suddenly, in the words of Wooden Leg, Wooden Leg's an 18-year-old Cheyenne warrior. He's fighting on a hill about 200 yards behind this hill here. According to Wooden Leg, the shots stopped coming. Only then, hundreds of warriors, all four sides, sweep up over the hill. When it's over, Custer and all 210 men under his immediate command, 210 counting Custer, are dead in this 1 square mile area that I've been describing to you. So a total of 268 soldiers, scouts, and civilians who rode into battle did die in this battle. That, of course, leaves 379 who actually did survive the battle, albeit 4 miles away. Warrior casualty, nobody's ever going to know. No written records. Estimates have always been anywhere from a dozen or so to 300 or more. Again, all we're left with is oral tradition, family tradition. If you go across the street to the Indian Memorial that honors the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors who fought Custer, and the Sioux and Arikara warriors who scouted for and fought with Custer. I did say Arapaho because there were 5 Arapaho Indians that actually were in the vicinity, had joined the Sioux and the Cheyenne to fight up here that day. against the soldiers. We know 10 women and children died very early in the battle as well, probably killed either by Custer scouts trying to steal ponies, or some of them possibly when the skirmish line was firing at the warriors coming out of the village, those bullets going into the village. As when it's over, the Native Americans have won their biggest victory ever in the West against any U.S. fighting force. We also know that the Indians have won their last victory anywhere against any U.S. fighting force, because although the victory will be celebrated as a high water mark of the red man trying to hold back white westward expansion, and it will be celebrated as long as Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho peoples are on this earth. A grand victory, a great victory. But tragically and unfortunately, I think all Americans realize here today, 146 years later, they won this great battle, and in the process, they lost everything.